My name is Edna Register Boone. I was born in 1907 in rural Houston County, Alabama. We moved away from the farm when I was 3 years old and moved into the little town of Madrid, still Houston County. Times were troubled, a war going on, the flu epidemic that followed the boll weevil, 3 catastrophes right there. A new disease, just like another epidemic would be, perhaps, maybe not the flu, but something else. And it would be a new disease. We would have to learn to deal with it. I was 10 years old, and my family was the only family in the little town that did not contact the flu. Therefore, my parents became automatic nurses. They nursed every family in town, and one family in particular was outside of town limits. My father and Uncle Eli, whom we called his manservant, dug a common grave and buried 3 people in it: mother, father, and a young daughter. Unfortunately, we had no sanitary conditions in the area at that time, so the people were buried in the clothes they died in and wrapped in the sheets, because there was no way no one to wash the bed linens for them. So they were buried in a common grave. I do not remember a single church burial caused by the Asian flu. It was prevalent. The greatest problem, of course, was getting medication. Only had one doctor, Dr. Andres, a wonderful man. He did the best he could. We had no penicillin, no sulfur, nothing to treat that dreadful disease. Of course, there was wagon loads of sick people lined up at his front door all the time. If you loaded a sick person whom you could no longer help and put them in a wagon, which is what most transportation was, put them in that vehicle and take them to Dothan, to a hospital, that chances are that patient would be dead when they got there. Okay, if it wasn't, there would be no room. The rooms would be filled. The doctors would be worked to capacity. That's why most families just buried their own dead. The flu itself, the so-called, I think they called it the Asian flu, affected the throat and the windpipe and chest, and lack of medication. We had a little drugstore, and he had a pharmacist, a hired pharmacist, but he could only supply Paragard or maybe mentholatum, or I don't know what kind of ointments they put on their chests, but that's about all there was. And my mother's would take a half a teaspoonful of soda and put it in a glass of water for each of us, my twin brothers, and for me, and we would drink that before breakfast. I've often thought that that's what saved us. She said that that soda would neutralize the system and we would be less subject to pick up the germ. It must have worked because we were the only family, entire family, that escaped having that dreadful flu. It was my job as a 10-year-old to take food to people, to families that were all of them stricken. Mama would put a gauze bandage around my face, and she kept sterilized fruit jars on the stove at all times, and she would fill those jars with soup or whatever there was, and I would take those jars to the home of an unafflicted family, knock on the door, and leave the food at the door for someone to come pick it up. It was not a pretty picture. It was my job to see that the old-fashioned ranges that we cooked with had a reservoir, a hot water reservoir attached to the side of the stove. It was my job to see that that reservoir was full all the time. And of course I had to haul water up out of a well, but that wasn't hard for a 10-year-old. But anyway, that, and it was my job, my twin brother's job, to see that there was plenty of wood cooked for the fireplaces and the stove. One thing I remember that my father did, there was an open space on one side of our house, I would say the west side of Papa plowed up totally. I don't know what the measurement was, but I'd say 1/4 of an acre, and planted sweet potatoes. And I would say that half of the community lived off that potato patch, because no one was able to go shopping. No one was able to cook. They could bake a few potatoes even if it was in the fireplace. I knew I had to participate. I knew that my family was being protected. I was raised in a Christian family, and we had our evening prayers. I knew I had to do my part. I came home one day, I don't know where I had been, but I came home and Mama was stretched out on a pallet in front of the fireplace. Oh, I panicked. Mama, are you sick? She said, "No, child, I'm just so tired. I wanted to get as close to the fire as I could." She said, "I knew if I got into that bed that I might not ever get up." We were like a great big family, you might say. I doubt if we had 200 residents. It brought families closer together. And it brought our little town closer together, because we all suffered losses. One way or the other, if not through war, then through the epidemic. Oh my goodness, what if it happened suddenly, say within 3 or 4 days, or some sort of epidemic sweep through? I think the only thing I could suggest about that is to be aware that it could happen again. Children need to learn about what could happen. Of course, I'm sure hospitals are aware. But the shock wave that sets in when something like this happens kind of stuns people, you know. They go beyond thinking correctly. And lots of times I would come in and I would cry because of all the sickness that was around me. And I knew that that sickness was deadly. It was depressing to me. Be aware. Be aware.